Okay, hello everyone. So I'm back here again to have another discussion with Mostly Connected. We talked before about a range of topics, and I wanted to have a follow-up with her because I think we had a lot of interesting discussions, but there were some things that we either didn't agree on or we didn't fully flesh out our ideas. So I wanted to just have a follow-up and you know see if we can continue our discussion. So yeah, so why don't you just talk about you did a series of videos about our discussion, and they were really interesting. Do you want to talk about like your thoughts about your internal process of how things went with the discussion?
Yeah, well, I think I kind of learned that it's difficult to it's especially difficult to talk about for me to talk about my thoughts if I haven't sort of already gone over them, I guess, in video format for some reason. That's just, I guess, what I'm learning as I'm working through and learning to communicate better as a result of this, because I do think I have a communication disorder of some sort, and that can make communicating some of my thoughts about these somewhat contentious topics difficult, especially since my thoughts aren't necessarily the same as any particular group of people necessarily. It's kind of just what I've thought up, influenced by other people, but ultimately my thoughts. And so it can be hard for me to express myself clearly, especially when there are multiple differences, say, with my thoughts and yours on multiple layers. But I did appreciate, I felt like I was given, enough time, to a reasonable amount of time, to express my thoughts throughout the interview, and I appreciated that. I didn't feel like it was just a, lambast interviewee type of interview, and that meant a lot to me. So thanks for that. That's kind of my overall view on what happened.
Yeah, I think it was good. I feel like it's one of the better ones I've done. I like things. I liked the way it went. Actually, I felt like I learned something. I hope you did.
Yeah.
So yeah, I felt like it was really fulfilling, and I'm glad we're talking again.
Yeah.
Uh, One of the things that we kind of like had a disagreement about was James Damore, and I wanted to talk about that again because I felt like we didn't totally completely, I think, resolve the way we were thinking about things.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I guess, um, do you feel like you understood like the points I was making about how I felt about the situation?
Yeah. Well,
Because I do think that I kind of got a good understanding from you. But yeah, I'll let you go first, and I'll let you know what I took from that part of our discussion.
well, I mean, I guess I see it as you see. I don't actually know any Google employees. You said you talked to Google employees. I guess my takeaway from your side was that you talked to, it sounds like, multiple people who would have had a very difficult time working under James Damore. And my take on it is that, well, perhaps some of that, it's not just the media hype that made that happen. I think he was a socially awkward person and might have just been very difficult to work under for other reasons. I don't know. I just think the media hype made it worse than it had to be, I guess. And, so I don't, and I also think that, I don't think that someone should be fired based on what people who didn't actually work under him thought about what he
Yeah,
said. I guess that's my take on what I thought your position was, and you can clarify that.
yeah. I guess my thing would be like I think the thing that really screwed him up was like he didn't make his point well enough, and so it got misconstrued as something that it so everyone thinks that he's like against diversity or like he thinks women just like I don't know, like there's a lot of people that kind of
Mhm.
strawman his opinions.
Yeah,
um
yeah,
but I think it's because he's presenting all this evidence to say that the gap is okay, which I think was the wrong way to go about it. So what I think would have been better was if he said, "I disagree. I think that trying to get equality the way that they're trying to do it is probably not going to work, and here's a way that's better, and it's going to get better results for everyone." I think if he just stuck to that and didn't get into
The
you know.
gap being okay.
Yeah, well, yeah, and sort of saying, it's due to like, women are more into other stuff, blah blah blah. So I think that was the flaw, where because now we're fighting over like, can women or other people be good in tech, instead of saying what's the best way to get women and other people into tech, because that's the real point he
Yeah.
was trying to make. I
Well,
think.
I think from what I understand, he mentioned he kind of went about both routes, but I think, or tried to go about both routes, but of course the media is going to jump on the one route. I think the thing that I think, as a woman who has been in tech and may be in tech again, the way I look at it is that you've got to look at, um, you've got to look, I do think that women who want to be in tech should be in tech, but I also think that just allowing the women who want to be in tech to be in tech alone, just that alone won't necessarily lead to there being the same number of men as women. And because of that, because of that, I say that the gap is okay, but I say it as from perspective of both men and women. Individual men and individual women should be allowed to do what they want and what they're good at, and we shouldn't just assume that someone isn't good at what at tech because they're women, because obviously there's a wide range of both interests and also abilities, and there are plenty of women who I think should be in tech, that they're doing great work in tech, and that's my on that. But it's more nuanced than what the media sent out.
Yeah.
And yeah.
I definitely agree. I would say that he was fired because of the media uproar about it, and the fact that it spiraled out beyond, just like what it was. It became a referendum on whether or not women have a place in big tech companies.
Mm-hmm.
And
Which I don't think it was ever supposed to be.
it was, yeah, exactly. It was not supposed to be that. That probably wasn't his intention at
Yeah.
all. And once
But
that
once the media have portrayed something one way, it's very hard to reverse that perception.
Yeah. And
And
that becomes the talking point, right? Like everyone was talking about that. All the people who were responding to it, like very high up people, CEOs of other companies, CEOs within their company are responding to it in that way. And at that point, he's lost control of the narrative.
at that point, basically, I feel like it seems to me like the world just sort of went along with the characterization and casually misunderstood him. And I think that's what bothers me about the situation, is that it's an example of how someone who I don't think had bad intentions was ruined by the media characterizing him in a way that I don't think was accurate. And I worry about similar things happening to other people. Not probably to me, but theoretically it could be me too. And so that's why I identified with him more than those women that you talked to at Google who felt that way, even though, like I said, I have been a woman in tech. Being a naturally awkward person myself, I identified more with him. And that was where my concern and my fears were coming from. And that's why I feel that way, myself. And I personally feel like a lot of those women personally, they wouldn't get along with me necessarily. And it's not because I want to hurt their feelings. It's just because they would assume something about me that I don't think is true. But, there you go. Once they've assumed it, you can't roll that back necessarily. And I'm stuck with that.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. I think generally, and this kind of, I think, ties into another thing that James Damore and others like him have been talking about. Like they like he shared a bunch of data that's self-selected data of people who identify as different ideological beliefs, and it was like the way that they felt working at these companies in Silicon Valley. And basically from that data you can see that people that are liberal are generally pretty happy, but the more conservative or libertarian they are, the more they feel uncomfortable in their environment, which I think is interesting because there's a few problems with like some of the data that he was talking about. It's like self-selected data is not a very good sample, for one, and for two, it's like, imagine like actually this kind of happened to me once. I was working at a company, and there was a guy who was a Trump supporter, and we kind of got into arguments. I don't think that really soured our working relationship. I didn't really dislike the guy, but
Mhm.
you know, if you have people who ideologically disagree at a workplace, like, I mean,
Yeah.
and if you're in the minority opinion, basically, it's going to be hard for you to like present your ideas in a way where people are going to accept them. Is the way I would say it.
Yeah. And that's kind of how I felt while working at the tech company I worked for. I felt kind of like the day after Trump won the election, or the like, there was this memo that went out like, anyone who needs cookies, come to the thing. And it was just kind of generally understood that people were unhappy about Trump winning. Whereas if Clinton had won, I think people would have just been generally okay with it. But
Yeah.
Trump won, so everyone was upset. And see, for me, as someone who did not vote for Trump but still kind of felt that, I didn't think that we were necessarily worse off with Trump winning as opposed to Hillary winning, because there were things that bothered me about her too. I kind of had to go through this phase where I was like, well, I'm probably in the minority here. I don't know that I'm necessarily going to be able to talk to most of these people about my opinions. I feel, a little bit isolated here in this culture. It's not anybody's fault necessarily, but that's where I am, just being in the minority opinion here.
Yeah,
So,
and it just imagining like at someone at the break room, around the water cooler, trying to like sell Trump to other employees that are like, not Trump supporters. This seems like a difficult proposition, and yeah, that's going to lead to some conflict.
yeah.
The thing I would say is like, I think there's a difference between people having opinions and opinions being popular or being well received, right? So,
Yeah.
if if someone presents an idea and people are like, "Hey, I just think that sucks. I think that just doesn't make sense to me." I think that's different than like actively censoring someone. Like,
Right.
not all ideas should be
Exactly. I
equally
think that
taken as
that's true
popular.
too. And I don't think that there is, but it's hard to tell, right? Because people wouldn't be open about it if they did actively censor someone. It's kind of like the whole thing with trying to figure out how many people have been discriminated against, for reasons of gender or sex or so forth. People are not going to be open about it if they're doing it. And so the question becomes, well, how would you even go, like, on some level, it's very difficult to measure this type of stuff because people don't want to look like they're discriminating against someone for unfair reasons. So they don't tend to do it unless they think they can get away with it. And so how would you even know? It's very difficult to measure this type of stuff sometimes.
Yeah, for sure. It's difficult to measure. So I would say that my takeaway from our discussion was I think that probably myself and some other people that are kind of progressive have kind of a reactionary sort of feeling about guys like James Damore, because we see the ideas that he's putting out there as possibly leading to a sort of regression of some of the gains that people have made, basically non-white or non like white men have made in other, getting people into different levels, either in government or in business, getting them to higher levels that they'd never got in before. And we see this as like a call to like go backwards and go
Oh,
back to,
okay. Yeah.
having this sort of old boys club, if you will. And
Yeah.
I
And
think a lot of
see,
people see that problematic.
I don't think that most people want to go backwards. And I don't think that most people who took James Damore's side, if you will, want to go backwards. Maybe I'm just unaware of how, I obviously, like you said, who would know, because who would want to express those ideas publicly? Necessarily not that many people, but I think, like, from my perspective, I think the important thing is that individuals can do what they want when it comes to working in these companies. So I would want, I would want everybody to be evaluated based on, what they actually bring to the company, regardless of whether they're a man or a woman. And that's the main thing I'm going for. And I think that if you go for that, you're automatically going to get, no, maybe not the best distribution in terms of, like, I just think it may not be the distribution that any particular person wanted, but it'll be a distribution that people can at least live with and learn to work with. And that's my take on it.
Yeah, and I agree. I don't think that most people that back James Damore were like, oh yeah, we want the old boys club back. We want a bunch of white dudes from Connecticut and New Jersey running everything. Yeah, I don't think that's the case. I think that if he could have like stated his case in a way that was a little bit more articulate and not focused on the difference between men and women, and focus more on like because Google is like trying to kind of fix a problem that has happened in society, because we haven't had total equality for people in the last 50 years, and that has some kind of problems that surface in like the higher you go, the higher you're going to find these problems. So like a place like Google, if they're taking the best people, they're going to get people, generally speaking, that are the most well off, right? And so that's just a reflection of.
So you want to see if there's people outside of that demographic that fit. And I do think that to the extent that they're doing that, and to the extent that they're reaching out towards people with, that started from a lower socioeconomic status, that's actually something I support to the extent that it works, because I do think that there are a lot of people who are living below their potential because they just haven't found a way to get connected to that potential. And a lot of that has to do with socioeconomic status. And so to the extent that companies can find ways to mitigate that in ways that truly work, I actually think that that's a really good thing. I think I'm kind of on the page with James Damore, though, that whatever they were doing obviously wasn't the most effective way to do that. And I do think that it's unfortunate that his whole memo got demonized, because it sounds like he was trying to offer suggestions that might have actually been more helpful towards getting women into tech in ways that were actually, pleasant for everybody involved, if you know what I'm saying.
I think one of the quotes he said, I was trying to fix the culture. I don't, maybe he didn't succeed, but that's what he was trying to do.
Well, I think the thing about him, and see, this is why it's so sad, is that I think the problem with him trying to fix the culture is that he was and is a naturally awkward person. And I think what we really need is a culture that, I guess, doesn't jump on people, or is a little bit more willing to give people the benefit of a doubt. And I think it's mostly the mainstream media's fault. And I wouldn't just call the liberal media outlets out on this too. Fox News seems to be doing the same thing. I think what it is we need more mercy from the media in general when it comes to characterizing people, and we need more nuance. And especially when you're dealing with people who don't have the best social skills. That's kind of just my take on it.
Yeah. And I remember one of the things too that you said in our discussion that I found really interesting was that you said something like, they're coming for me too and my sisters, which I found kind of interesting, because
that was kind of like overly dramatic.
Like at the time I was like, I don't know. I don't think.
Yeah, it was. I think, but what it is that I mean, when that happens to somebody like that, I do kind of identify with that person. And I did kind of feel like, something like that could have happened to me if I were in that situation. And, whether it's realistic or not, I may have better social skills than James Damore. I hope I do. But, whether it's realistic or not, that's the kind of thing I worry about, because I have grown up being kind of on the outside, and it's because I don't necessarily know what to say or what to do in a lot of situations. And so that is something that I worry about constantly. And one of the things I worry about is being judged as discriminatory. And that's not what I want, obviously, but that's not what anyone wants. And so how do you prove that you're not trying to be discriminatory? You can't really. And so that's a big concern that I have as a person, even though I'm a woman, because there are other groups that I could be judged as discriminating against that I don't want to be, but I want to be seen as, a nice person and a good person. But, you can't control how other people perceive you.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think the last thing was with the whole sort of James Damore thing was I think after he after the whole thing happened, he got fired. He kind of didn't do himself some favors because I think he did a lot of interviews where I think he articulated himself pretty well.
Mm-hmm.
But then he started like tweeting some stuff that was like kind of like out there, and
I guess I just haven't seen. I didn't necessarily follow um, all
yeah,
of that. You
yeah,
know,
he had one tweet that was like really bad where he was like saying he said something about the KKK where it's like, oh well, we can't even say that we can't even admit that their names are cool. Like Grand Wizard is a cool name, and people were like, what the fuck?
like, why do you care that that's a cool like?
Yeah, it was just like, and I think that kind of goes to your point though, right? It's like I don't think any of us really thinks that that he likes the KKK.
But the fact
But
that
it's
he
just
said that can be so like it's so easily misconstrued.
yeah,
Like that
yeah.
he's like he's giving the media fresh bait, and it's just like
Oh yeah, like like the articles that came after that, it was like, see, told you. So
like
he didn't do himself any favors, but I think that kind of goes to your point. Is like he's not a racist guy. He's not a like Klansman guy. Like he lived
it's
in
just
separate
it's just the
Mountain
fact that
View.
he would tweet about that when he could have tweeted about anything else
I
just
know.
makes him
Yeah.
look bad. And it's just like, oh dear, can you please just no, you don't like you don't have to
Yeah.
do it. And I think that's what it comes down to is that he's clearly lacking in social skills on some level, and because of that, that's why actually, I don't know that it would have necessarily been easy to work underneath him, as a man or as a woman, just because for all I know, he would have had a really difficult time interpreting what the people underneath him really needed. And see, that's what worries me about that. But depending on what line of work they were doing, it might have been okay because if it's coding based to the level that they don't like. As a software developer, I feel like the social demands of being a software developer are less than some other careers, and it depending on the social demands of the job of the people underneath him, it could have still been okay.
Yeah.
It depends on the situation, but.
No, from all we know, he was a great, like as a developer, he was great, and he got he got promoted and he got very high marks, which is very difficult at Google. Like I know people like they're some of the best I've ever seen, and they don't even get promoted. So like to get promoted at Google, you are one of the best in the world. So yeah, he was very good at his job. He was very good at his job.
And
the
that's
problem,
that's why I think that maybe what should have happened is they should have kind of put him in a separate box, maybe to not have him be a supervisor of someone if that was what was causing problems for people. But I feel like it would have been nice if they had taken a stance against the ridiculousness, but they decided to just go along with the ridiculousness, and then that reinforces it, and it scares everybody who doesn't have that same reaction like me. It kind of scares me because I don't know what to expect from Google going forward as a result of that. But I just kind of have to say, well, it is what it is. And I do believe that the way Google is maybe the foremost company who's made the world this way. They made it so that information sharing is so much easier than it was in the past that I kind of feel like ultimately the truth prevails anyway. Maybe back in the day, it was easier for a newspaper to come in and completely lambast somebody and have that be the last word. But I don't think that's how it works anymore. And because of that, I'm optimistic,
Yeah. And I mean, James Damore is fine. Like he posted recently that he has another job.
Yeah.
And people like him get paid a lot, like a lot. So he's fine. Like the whole thing happened and he kind of like went on a media tour and now he's a senior software developer again somewhere making a lot of money.
So yeah, and I figured that he would be fine. When you get the negative attention, you also get some positive attention, and hopefully some of it's from people that you can actually stand. And then hopefully you can find your way into doing something that you want to do as a result of that. So it's not so much about worrying about him as a person. I think it's more about worrying about the fact that everyone now has this perception of him and the situation and what happened that I think is negative to the point where now it's going to lead people to become angry. See, my worry is that people would now become angry every time they hear basic facts, basic statistical evidence. They decide that the statistical evidence itself is somehow sexist. And that bothers me, because I don't want that to be the world that I don't want that to be the society that I'm living in. I want to be able to actually have honest conversations about statistics without assuming that they were produced or brought up for some bad purpose.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a fair point. So yeah, I wanted to switch over topics now. I just want to talk about the video you did about privilege recently. I thought it was interesting. One of the things that really kind of stuck out to me was like the way you defined privilege, the way you saw it, at least. I found kind of interesting. I think so. You said it was something. It was like it's a conscious or given thing that can be removed or given back.
Yeah, something that can be consciously given or removed.
Yeah, and
I know that's not how it's seen by intersectional feminists, by probably by progressive people in general. But the reason I want to keep it that way for myself, for me using that word, is because I think that when conservatives in particular argue that white privilege doesn't exist, for example, or male privilege doesn't exist, they're doing it from the perspective of arguing it based on that definition. And so you can say, well, the thing that I call white privilege or male privilege, it definitely does exist. And okay, fine. But based on that, it's hard to have a conversation. And I feel like the issue that conservatives have with the word privilege being used that way has to do with the fact that it was never used to refer to something that couldn't be consciously given or taken away before. Yeah. And so now you've got an issue where it seems to conservatives, at least, and I don't know about, like say libertarians or, whoever else, just doesn't identify as on the left, classical liberals or what have you. It concerns me. It seems as if to conservatives, at least, as if that word privilege is being used to make it sound as if it should be something that can be consciously taken away, when it really isn't. And if you listen to the way it's defined, it really isn't. And so it makes it sound like it's someone's fault, no matter how many times people say, oh no, we know it isn't. It still sounds like it was somebody's fault. And it sounds like the word was picked in order to make it sound like it was somebody's fault. And I think that bothers people on a fundamental level. And so I'm saying, okay, well, why don't we come up with a different word if we can, or a set of different words to describe what's really going on here and the underlying causes of this.
Yeah, so I think that's an interesting point for sure. My only issue was like, so if you look at the dictionary definition of privilege, it's basically something that's granted to someone, like or a group of people, like for an arbitrary reason, pretty much. It's like an advantage or immunity, something like that.
Yeah.
So it's
in
really
most cases was used officially, So for example, like official privilege, in the past there were actually official privileges that would come to certain groups of people that wouldn't come to others, and that was a problem. I guess the way I see privilege used now is I'm worried that it seems to be being used to imply that there are still official privileges that come with being a particular race or gender, when officially there aren't. And
what do you mean by officially? Do you mean like in the law, codified?
Yeah, I mean, I know because if you have a law that officially discriminates between, between people, like say on a racial level, that's going to be, the minute somebody sees it, the media is going to be all over it, and it's going to be blown up, and it's going to be fixed. That's what I feel like, and it's probably unconstitutional at this point. And so I feel like from that perspective, I feel like, and that's the perspective I feel like conservatives are arguing from when they say white privilege doesn't exist, for example. So I feel like I want to have a better conversation about this. I want to have a more accurate conversation about it, I guess is what I'm saying. And I'm not sure that privilege is the best word to do that, but I do feel like within the category of people who use the word privilege and like really see it as as, you know, the best word to use. I feel like there are different types of people using it for different reasons, for sure.
Yeah, I think what someone on the left would say about your definition from like the way that they use it is that like if you're saying that a privilege is something that can be given or taken, I think that's like not the best way to understand it because so like if you were white in like the 1940s or something, you had a privilege of living in a society where you were granted a lot of things because you were white for no other reason other than the fact that you were white, right? So that's the type of privilege that they're talking about. It's these things that are given to people outside of like by no control of their own, and those things like have an effect on them that is positive or negative, right? So
And so I see that as an advantage. But I do think that, you know, the privilege of being able to do certain things, I feel like it makes sense to keep the word privilege for official stuff or stuff that can be, you know, specified, and advantage is more of a word that can be used generically. And so I'd rather use the word advantage to describe that. Privilege, though, in the sense of being able of not having a specific law against you. I'm willing to use privilege in that sense. So in the case of, you know, prior to the civil rights era, there were a lot of times actual laws preventing people from doing particular things. And I would say, okay, well, the privilege to not have that law, you know, against you, that I'm fine with using a privilege for. So it depends. It depends. I just want privilege to be used for specific things, at least in my case. I realize I can't control how other people use the word.
sure,
It's
yeah.
maybe by using the word differently myself, I can have better conversations about it. Hopefully, that's the goal.
Okay.
You know.
So would you say that there's like a white advantage
Yeah,
then?
I would. And I would say even now that there is a wide advantage. And I think some of it has to do with, you know, just the default, like I was saying, the default societal image. I think some of it has to do with stereotypes. Yeah, I would say that there is an advantage in in general cases. I think there is an advantage to being white in this society.
Yeah,
Uh,
cool.
I
Okay, I
really,
think that really kind of clarifies my disagreement with what you were saying. So it's just that you think um uh you think privilege is like something almost like state given or like some type
yeah,
of
it sounds like that to me.
yeah.
And because of that, and I think that that's the issue that a lot of conservatives have with the term. And you know, maybe it is because some of them, I think some of them are, you know, in denial about there being a white advantage in general. For me, I kind of look at it in certain ways, whereas I see that there's a white advantage in general, but that doesn't mean that in every situation you're advantaged by being white. And that's another reason that I want to use, I think it's good to use the term advantage because it makes it sound less, for some reason, the way privilege is used is a lot of time it makes it sound more like all encompassing than it is, like as if in every situation you're going to be disadvantaged because you're white. And I don't think that's the case. And, you know, I have an example of that where, you know, right after I left my job in IT, I came and worked at a job where, you know, it was, they where I was making a lot less, and I came in and I was one of two white people in the room. Almost everyone else was black. And somebody said, one of the HR people who was black said, you know, this company really wants people to advance, yada, yada, yada. And I looked around and I thought, you know, if I try to advance, will it be seen as me trying to get power over these people who are, you know, like that's a real concern I had in that job. Now, it doesn't mean that, you know, it doesn't mean that I couldn't have more, like it doesn't mean that it wouldn't be easier for me to find a job elsewhere because I was white, maybe, you know, like overall it would be easier. But in that specific situation, that gave me a concern that, you know, other people may not have had. And but then of course I go and leave that place and I go and try to get an apartment, and I'm able to pass my current job off as, you know, a kind of a job in between the good jobs, because that was what I was hoping it would be. It didn't turn out that it was, but that was what I was hoping it would be. But the reason I was able to pass it off that way, I knew it was easier for me to pass it off that way because I was white. If I'd been black, it might not have been as easy because black people in general, are in a lower, socioeconomic group, I would have been judged based on the color of my skin, and it might have been different. Obviously, I don't know because I can't be black and white, but that is something that I thought about at the time. And so I think you've got to look at how it applies in the different situations, and that's my take on it. Just I want to use words specific to the issue,
Okay.
and I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair for sure. I think that there's definitely sort of some flaws in the way that people on the left talk about like advantage or privilege or whatever you want to call it, because there's a lot of times where there's like a white person who's homeless, or there's a white person who's poor, or whatever. Like the opioids epidemic, that's a very good example. And so then people are like, oh, hey, look, this person's white and homeless. White privilege doesn't exist. But the greater idea they're trying to get at is if you're black, you're more likely to be homeless. Right.
So, yeah, you are more likely. And so it's just I think what it is there's kind of a general white advantage that I do think is real, but there are some specific situations where it might be to your advantage to be black over white in a particular situation, particularly if you're, looking to fill a role, like a social role. Like, unfortunately, I think society, like, it stereotypes people. And so if you're in a role that's stereotypically seen as a role that a minority person, like if you're asking for help in a way that you would think mostly minorities would ask for help in, and you're white, that might be to your disadvantage. So that's just kind of my take on that. So in general, yes, I think, it's to your advantage to be white, but you've got to look at the specific situation sometimes too, and not just slam privilege. It was always, like, that's my thought.
Yeah, for sure. Because like you said, like there's definitely and a lot of it had to do with historical circumstances where people who are white, like they have more wealth, they're less likely to be in jail, they're less likely to be homeless, they're less likely to, get killed by the police when they're arrested, blah 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 blah. There's a lot of things there.
And I don't know if you've seen like and I think a lot of it has to do with, default image of a particular group. Like you've got an image of what, unfortunately, the image of what people from certain minority races isn't as good as the default image. And it has to do a lot with, unfortunately, you can't control the behavior of other people in your group, first of all, but second of all, that behavior is influenced by what happened before. And, if I don't know if you watched my second recap video, but basically, I do think that in ways that people don't realize, in ways that nobody's really talking about in detail, I think a lot of what happens within the Black community, per se, is influenced by the history in ways that people don't talk about, because you have decades after slavery, you have decades where people aren't fully given the chance to advance themselves. And that sort of sends the memo to the whole culture. It sends a message of learned helplessness that, you might remove the official barriers, but the underlying problems are still going to be there, and it makes sense why they're still there. And part of it's because there was, discrimination, like official discrimination, even for so long, that it kind of takes more than a generation and a half to get over all the effects of that, even if everybody's on the same page and everybody's working with the same information, which we're not. Yeah. And so that I think is a big issue in our society right now.
Yeah, for sure. I know that, well, one thing I'm really curious about, I would love to see, so in the United States, there was this period called the Great Migration. I think there's basically been two of them. So it's when African Americans left the South and then went to like the North. They went to like Chicago and New York, and eventually like West to places like San Francisco. So I'm kind of curious to look and see if there's any data about the differences in how these people succeeded or not.
Yeah.
And like how people who left and went to places that were more accepting of them, how they ended up in comparison to people that were kind of, basically had to end up, fighting the civil rights movement,
Yeah, and I would imagine there's quite a difference, I think, but of course you want to look at the actual data.
Right? Yeah.
Based on assumptions. I think that one thing about me is, I live in Texas, which, it did fight with the Confederacy in the Civil War, but it didn't fight for the same reasons as the traditional cotton states fought. And so necessarily, I think it fought, it was more complicated. And so because of that, Texas doesn't have the same, long slave history that the other southern states do. And so I think because of that, in Texas, I would say things are probably better than in the deep South or what have you. I don't know, because I haven't really lived there, but I do think that I think that Texas right now, I think, especially with the number of people who live here, the number of Hispanic people who live in Texas is huge. So I know it's not multiracial in the same way as California necessarily. There aren't as many Asians, but I think we do have enough of a multiracial population here that and we've been given enough time to kind of digest ideas about equality that I think, we're about as good as we're going to get, like right now. I feel like the environment is a lot better than it would be if we didn't have, if we had that slave history the same way as the Deep South states. Because I think part of the problem that the Deep South faces is that, when you have that type of a history, you kind of feel like you have to go into denial about it, I guess, or at least that's like the white person side of it. Like, so I feel like a lot of the problems we have is that, so many people have gone into denial about the bad effects of what happened. And like that just perpetuates over the generations. And then you have, a really prickly and defensive culture that arises out of that it's really hard to like, I feel like it's just not as good of a culture and not as accepting of a culture. And it's because of the denial about what happened earlier, even though it's not happening now.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that there's sort of been this type of like, don't talk about it.
Yeah.
I mean, and like this is playing out. I saw there's just been a bunch of people tore down Confederate statues still. That's still a thing. There was I just saw someone, they posted a clip of, it was like one of the biggest slave plantations in the United States. It was they had a gigantic mansion, and some people burned it down. They burned it to the ground. So yeah, these things are still kind of playing out, I think, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But yeah, I do think that things have gotten better. I think things.
Well, look at what was good from the culture back then. I say, okay, well, it's not that everything from that culture was bad, but we're still dealing with the after effects. And I do think that, slavery in the Americas, I know slavery happened everywhere pretty much, but I think that the issue with slavery in the Americas and why people still talk about it today is because most of the time the groups looked similar enough that it was easy for the population to assimilate after they were set free. And I feel like the issue we're dealing with is that you have people from completely different parts of the world. One group is slaves to the other group. Then even after the group is finally set free, you still have all these issues where it's a lot easier to discriminate against people that look as different from you.
Yeah.
As that. And I think that that's the real issue here. It's the differences in appearance. And
yeah, and I think it's really, honestly, it's our conceptions of race, like the way that the American way of conceiving of racial identities was really a problem. I mean, someone like myself would not be considered white at any point in American history going backwards. And, I don't think it matters even how much like European you had. Like if they knew that you were black.
It matters if there's just a little bit, if it's just a little bit different, if it's just a little bit off. Yeah. From what they think of as white. And I think, I mean, I don't know enough about I don't know enough about how much of that's carried forward today in the minds of other people, say. You can read about it in the past, so I have like an idea of what it was like in the past, but it's hard to know how much of that's carried forward. But it does kind of bother me, to read about, pre-civil rights and civil rights era stuff and think that's how people were. Like, that's how people were in this country. in those decades, like
Yeah,
there
it's
was
really
so
bad.
much. Yeah,
Really
it.
bad.
Yeah, you look at it. I mean, I look at it. Obviously, it's not the same for me as for you, but I look at it and I think, how were people like that? You know,
Yeah.
how was that the way it was? What happened, especially in America, where you would think that people would be more, so accepting, but I think I think a culture of denial developed that really did not want to get broken down, and it did to I think mostly get broken down, but you've still got the after effect and the denial within whatever culture it stayed with. And
Yeah.
it's really quite sad that this would happen in, I mean, just never mind all the people that were hurt by it. It's really sad that this would happen in America, where you would think that something as some like you would think that that level of discrimination would not have become so ingrained even within any part of America. And yet, especially in the South, but also in the North to a great extent, and everywhere to a great extent, there it was.
Yeah.
And it's I, the way I really like this book. There's this book that I read when I was younger. It's called The Family Nobody Wanted. And it's about a couple that adopted a lot of children. And most of the children they adopted were biracial, because what they found was that, based on the way people were being about the races, the biracial children had a hard time getting adopted, because people were such sticklers about wanting to make sure that the child was their race and not any other race.
Mm-hmm.
And so you'd have children that were biracial that just were not getting adopted. And this family, and the parents were both white, but they decided, we're going to adopt these children. And because they wanted to have kids, and they couldn't have kids themselves. And the amount of pushback that they received from first official organizations, but then just people who didn't understand, was great. And they tried to adopt a girl who was part African at one point, and like the system didn't even want it to happen. Like, it just shut down. There was a whole bunch of red tape that wouldn't have been there for any of their other kids, and it was because there was such intense prejudice, even from the part of people who had become perfectly accepting of all their other kids, at the thought of them adopting somebody with of African descent in any way. And it's so weird looking back on it, but that was how people were.
Yeah, no, for sure. And again, like, our conceptions of race and stuff are like pretty messed up. But one thing I did want to point out, that I was thinking of, is like, I think one of the problems liberals have is, like, we think about and we look back on that time period of the civil rights era, and the problem was most conservatives were in favor of some level of like segregation, or what have you, the status quo of their time.
Mm-hmm.
And so going forward now, so first off, the like the left wing of the United
Mm-hmm.
States has basically paid, to this very day, for backing civil rights electorally. So from 68 to still today, there's been a shift in terms of who's taken power in this country, and it's been a lot more right wing than it was during like the FDR era, like 1932 to 1968. So they paid a political price for doing the right thing. And at the same time, there's a bunch of people who basically today talk about, I saw someone, it was like Brian Kilmeade on Fox News, talking about, because there's a Colin Kaepernick thing going on, talking about, oh, well, he's not like Muhammad Ali. And it's like, dude, if you were around at the time, you wouldn't have backed Muhammad Ali. He was against, all these things. And so a lot of people on the left see this type of, it's hard being around people who like are against your rights now, when you feel like they wouldn't be for your rights in the past. And it's hard to
you feel like they're against, you feel like this is, you see people, and if they were in a different situation, they would be, they are not fully examining themselves, and they're not fully considering what they would think if they were back in the past. They basically act like everything in the past that changed was all good, and they would have been 100% on board with it. But the minute something in the future changes, then that's bad. And that's actually why I don't think of myself as a typical conservative. I think of myself as a conservative, but I don't think of myself as a typical conservative. And it's because what I'm looking for is what changes in the past have actually, like, I want to kind of form what I think is as coherent of an opinion as possible. Sure, I'm gonna fail, but I don't want to be one of those people that's like, oh well, everything that changed in the past is completely fine. No more changes in the future. I want it to be like, well, let's look and see what changes in the past have worked most well. Like, I'm more of like for examining the changes that happened in the past, and then I'm open to change in the future. Change in the future is going to happen anyway, no matter what I want. And that's just change in the future happens. But but I want to at least be able to look at those and say, okay, what changes do I agree with and what do I disagree with? Because it's not just it's not just a all change is good or all change is bad dichotomy. There's some changes that are good and some changes that are bad, and I would like to be able to form a perspective on that I feel is as consistent as possible. It's not going to be, I'm going to make mistakes, but that's what I want.
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess the point I'm trying to get at is I hope some conservatives understand how repressive the status quo can be for some people. And because, most conservatives are people where the status quo is good for them. And so they want it perpetuated ad infinitum because, if things are good, why would you want it to change,
Yeah. And I think that's true. I mean, looking at, there are a lot of things I like about Ben Shapiro, but I do think that he's a little bit like, I don't think he and, a lot of even the conservatives that I respect always understand, that you're talking about people who are trying to fit into the system the way it is and have been unable to. And when you're talking about people that have tried to fit into the system the way it is and are unable to, that's why, that's part of the underlying reason for this change. It's not just people being upset about nothing. There are people who really are trying to make things work for them the way it is, and it's not working for them, and they're trying to get listened to. And if the right isn't going to listen to them, well, then they're going to turn to the left. And, maybe they are not completely on board with, whatever the left is doing, but people need a voice, and they'll go to whoever gives them that voice sooner.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's kind of what I feel like the left in America has kind of become. It's like a fraction of a bunch of different groups of people all aligned together. It's like gay rights and women and minorities, like African Americans and Asian Americans and Hispanics. It's this weird amalgamation of people. And, it wasn't that way, in the 50s or 40s. It was basically a more broad set, but the way that, and I think the real problem I have is like the way conservatives have reacted to a lot of things, like the demographic changes and and like the gay rights sort of movement. I think that it has created this type of polarization, and I think that I don't know if there was really a way that it could have been resolved more. I don't know, in a way where people could feel, where like most African Americans could feel like, hey, the Republican Party could represent me at some point. But some of the choices that have been made by people in the party has led us to where we are now. And I mean, the Democrats have done the opposite too.
Yeah, I feel like it's kind of both, and I feel like both parties. I haven't been really happy with anybody lately, which is, I think that's the part of the reason why Trump, who is not a traditional Republican, ended up winning the Republican nomination, because the Republicans weren't even happy with the Republican candidates. I think what's happening is that you're seeing a breakdown in terms of, I don't think that either one of the parties has done the best job of addressing what the people that are going to it actually need, and now you're seeing a breakdown, and Trump being president is a symptom of that, maybe the biggest symptom of that. I think that what I would say is that I do think that things are a little bit less clear cut in terms of minorities on the left and so forth, and the people in the groups that the left thinks it has on the left, though. And the reason why I think that is because I think only the conservatives talk about this, but Trump actually had a higher percentage of the Hispanic vote than Romney did. And I think what it has to do is the fact that people are, I think what you're seeing is that people are voting less on what it would appear that might be the factors on, and more on underlying factors that may be harder to see and hard to measure. Because it's easy to, you wouldn't think it would be easy to measure whether someone was Hispanic or not, since that's a cultural marker, really, not a racial marker, but it's easier to measure that than some other things. And I think that that's kind of what you're seeing is, how well do people fit into the current system? Do they really think that the changes proposed by the people who want to change the system are actually going to fix things for them? And I think that that's kind of the two questions that are on everybody's mind going forward is, can you fit into the system? Can other people fit into the system? If not, who is proposing the best changes? It is the party that's proposing the most changes actually proposing the best changes? What is the plan going forward? And does the plan going forward actually fit with me, I guess?
Yeah. Yeah. I definitely think we're in like a political whirlwind.
Yeah. And I think where it's going to end is really hard to tell.
It is hard to tell, but we live in interesting times, so
yeah. I'm just hoping that I am kind of worried. What I am worried about is it seems to me as if like people on the right, they get so excited about Trump, but I'm thinking you have to understand none of these changes are stable. Like nothing Trump does is stable because Trump is not a stable leader. He's like the head chimpanzee that everybody hates. All you need is two chimpanzees, like Jordan Peterson does this analogy. All you need is two chimpanzees who are grooming buddies to come and take him out while he's sleeping. Like, not that I'm saying he's going to be assassinated, but what I'm saying is like the sort of things the things that he's done, maybe they're not even bad. Like maybe the official changes he's made, they're not, some of them may be good changes. I think he's gotten rid of a lot of regulations, and that's good. It's good to cut down on regulations. But if such a large segment of the population hates you so much, there can't not be things that'll happen after that kind of destroy whatever good work.
Exactly. Even the good stuff is going to get removed because there's going to be such a strong upsurge of like, hey, we want to get rid of this guy and everything he did. Yeah,
and I'm not saying like I don't want to make 2020 predictions because I don't want to. But what I'm saying is like eventually, like whenever the other party gets back in power, you better believe that whatever good he's done is going to be washed away in the tide. And that's what's worrying me.
I've been telling conservatives, I don't know if they fully understand the way that people on the left feel about Trump. And I think that they're for kind of, whenever you win, if your baseball team
you're in a euphoria thing.
Exactly. Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking. You're in a euphoria. Exactly. Yeah. And they're in this euphoria period where they're getting all they want. They're getting these Supreme Court picks. They're getting all the legislation they want. And what's bubbling up is this outrage, this anger that could lead to the opposite of Trump from the left. And that's something that I don't want. I don't want to like left-wing Trump,
Yeah, that's just something that worries me because I'm not happy that Trump was like. I'm worried. I was worried about Trump when he took office. I'm less worried about Trump now, but I was worried about him at first, and I would be even more worried about a left-wing version of Trump, whatever that is. And
it's like worse than Bernie. So like imagine Bernie, but like further.
Oh gosh, see that's why I can't help thinking, well, all it takes, and that's why I worry because I feel like the country's getting more polarized. I feel like we're getting more polarized, and I don't like that because I think most of us are capable of having reasonable conversations or would be. Yes. It's just we get bogged down in arguing about Trump who is portrayed so vastly differently depending on which media outlet you turn to. And that's worrisome. It's all just, it's hard to trust any of this information.
So have you seen, do you know the cartoonist Ben Garrison? Are you familiar with him at all?
No.
Okay. So Ben Garrison, he does cartoons of Trump that show him in a positive light. And they're all really, like, a lot of them have some really weird imagery and some stuff that I think is, like, kind of a little too far. But it's very funny. Like it'll be Trump and he's, like, fighting the deep state. And there's, like, all these weird cartoon, like, there's, like, a cartoon pyramid of supposed to be the globalists or something. And he's, like, fighting them off. Or it's, like, Trump draining the swamp and it's him. And the swamp's, like, there's, like, Hillary and Nancy Pelosi or these swamp monsters or whatever. So I think, that's like how some people on the right view Trump, and people on the left view Trump as, like, basically the closest thing to fascism in the United States,
Yeah.
And like these two, how are these two things going to come together and create, like, a country where people can
really worried about at this point, especially because I don't know how polarized it is by state, but a lot of it seems to be polarized by state, and so I worry. Well, what happens when all the people in one state seem to think one way, and all the people in another state seem to think another? Like, it's worrisome how much of it is locale based. That worries me too.
Yeah, I feel like we're already at the point where it's so stratified. The majority of people, I feel like we're already at a point where the only thing that is really, in presidential terms, keeping Republicans in power is either war or it's like if they fight a war, they're probably going to win. George Bush won when he fought a war, or the Electoral College. So, like, if we had a national popular vote for the president, they would basically never win. And so you have, like, a majority of people who feel a certain way. Now, the Electoral College is there for a reason. You want someone who is the most popular of all the states to win, basically, is the idea, right? But the problem is it creates this potential stratification of the president wins the most states, but he doesn't win the most people. And if that gets perpetuated,
and the fact that that's happened as often as it has, that does create it leads to a lot of resentment and discouragement from the people who voted for the other person.
Yeah.
And that's a problem that I don't know how, like, I feel like it needs to be addressed somehow.
I agree. I actually think that we should do, like, an amendment where if that happens, so my idea, I think this was the idea I came up with. So if the person, so basically, let's say that happens, right? So what would happen then is the person who gets the popular vote but lost, they become the Speaker of the House. I think that would actually kind of fix it. I think.
Yeah, where that person. Yeah, that I do feel like that might. I don't know that I have a problem with that, but I know very little about anything, so
it's just a spitball.
Yeah. Yeah, I just feel like, although, trying to imagine Trump as president with Hillary Clinton is really
it'd be funny, right?
Well, it would be like 2016 forever. It would be all.
Oh, you're totally right. That would be awful. Oh my God, just imagining the news cycle of that. It's just 2016 forever. That would be horrible. That actually might be worse.
Oh God!
Because at least now we're heading somewhere different. But, like, if we had 2016 for 4 more years, my God,
that'd be so awful.
that actually might be a really good point against that idea.
Yeah, well, I don't know what the answer is, though, because I do think. But see, that's the problem, is we're so polarized that we're discussing this and then we think about it and we're like, wait a minute.
Wait, people are still going to be pissed, so what are we going to do? Yeah, I hope that at some point, and I really feel like it needs to be a Republican president, to have someone who's, like, very conciliatory and centrist and kind of, like, actually brings the country together. I think it would have to be a Republican to do it, because that person is the only person who can get, like, really conservatives to like them, but they can also, I think, still be liked by people that are on the left. And I think there's an opportunity. I think it's the great opportunity in the 21st century for some Republican to be very conciliatory and sort of centrist, sort of the way that George Bush was, but maybe without the wars.
Yeah.
And can really actually bring the country together and resolve the issues so that we can kind of move on and then move towards like the actual 21st century issues that we have to deal with, you know?
Yeah, well, we'll see what happens. I'm concerned, but at least you and I are having a conversation, you know. You invited me to have a conversation. This conversation is going, you know, pretty well, I would say. You know, I think we're agreeing on a lot more stuff than last conversation.
Yeah.
And what it means is that, you know, I think at least what we can do maybe as individuals is just try to have more conversations, because honestly, I don't know what to do on a political level right now, and I can't.
There's not a lot. There's really not a lot that we can do. I think millennials need to be more politically activated, whether you're on the left or the right, because I think that we need to have a change in the structures of power. I think it's a problem that the boomers have dominated our political discourse for just too long.
And they still are, and it's disturbing. I also think that we need to start by focusing. I think there needs to be a push to focus on local government, which, you know, I say, and I don't know enough about my local government at all. But I think if we're going to make changes, it starts at a local level, because a lot of the things that people are upset about are things that are happening at a local level. You know, a lot of the areas where, you know, you're still seeing discrimination, a lot of that originates at a local level. You have laws that slip through the books that nobody's protesting because nobody's paying attention, that are causing people real problems. You know, I look at the city where I live, and in the city where I live, or the area where I live, you've got situations where there are areas of the city that are not undergoing as good of upkeep, or, you know, cities that are not undergoing as good of upkeep. And you look at the population dynamics and you're like, well, okay, well, in this city, you know, it's, you know, majority white, and in this area it's majority black. And you can't help but think there's something about this that has to do with this. But what you need somebody to step in and say, wait a minute, let's fix this. Let's actually fix this. Let's clean out whatever's wrong with our government that's causing things not to be treated the way that they should be. You know,
I totally agree. I think that's because millennials face different challenges that can be resolved if they had power on a local level. For sure. I totally agree with you. And that's probably one of the best ways to like enact change.
Yeah.
And then sort of build your way up to, like, you know, being governor or senator or whatever.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's now why don't we talk about socialism? So we've been agreeing a lot. Let's see if we disagree here.
Yeah, that's actually, I guess, a good point to segue in, because I think the larger of a level socialism is on, the less sense it makes. I think, you know, I think socialist programs usually make the most sense if you're talking about a local level. I think the countries in Europe, they have less to lose from socialism than the United States would, because they have, you know, I think the bigger a country you have, the larger the population is, the more things can go wrong with the socialist system. And that's what I'm worried about when it comes to socialism in America. So that's my take on it.
Well, like, how would you define socialism? Like, what would you say it is?
Well, socialism, I guess, you know, it's hard because I feel like socialism is used in different ways by different people.
Totally agree.
That's for sure. But I feel like, you know, any program that you could describe as socialist, you know, not even, I think, you know, ultimately, I guess the extreme form of socialism would be, you know, to have everybody's money supply socialized, to have all income, everything socialized. I think most people in the United States are on the same page that doesn't work. But when you're talking with socialized health care and socialized education, well, then you get into the question of, does socialization, you know, yes, it provides resources to people when they need it right now, but the question is, are those resources going to get better over time when everything's socialized, or are they going to degenerate? And see, that's what I'm worried about. But I don't really know. I do understand that when you have a law that requires that emergency rooms take in people who are in desperate need, you're going to have some sort of a government support for that at some point. And so then the question is, well, can you draw a line in a way that makes sense? Personally, if you're going to draw a line or if you're going to just go full socialized medicine, what I'm worried about is people. I think already the capitalist system, that portion of the healthcare system is really messed up. So I feel like part of the problem that we have in this country is that there have been so many lobbyists that have created such a corrupt capitalist healthcare system that I feel like what really needs to happen more than anything, we either need socialized healthcare, which I don't want, or we need someone to come in and completely gut everything. And I wish someone would come in and completely gut everything, but sadly, there aren't enough people who know enough about the healthcare system to do that, and it really bothers me because I would really like a better healthcare system, but I feel like people are just blindly going along and not realizing how the way that the health payment system and the way the insurance system works by this point, there's just so many cases of people being charged way more than they need to be for simple
totally.
And that's what really bothers me.
And the debt, the medical debt.
Yeah, the debt really bothers me too. And so I feel like I wish that there were a way to actually have an open conversation about this, but it's just become such a swamp, to use Trump's language. It's such a swamp. I wish someone would actually come in and drain it. Sadly,
and one of the things that's kind of sad about Trump, so he ran saying we're going to allow them to negotiate drug prices, right? So that would have been really good if he was going to actually go through with that. But then, some swamp people came and they put him in the back room and they're like, hey, look, we make a lot of money, so we don't want you to do that. And that was it. They killed it. And so, it's hard. Like, we should negotiate drug prices for Medicare. It would save us a ton of money. But again, so the companies make tons of money from that. So they lobby and then, hey, look, it doesn't happen.
Yeah, I want information to be more open. I want information to be as simple as possible. See, that's why I like the thing with Trump saying he would cut regulations and doing it. But what I worry about is, like, for healthcare, I feel like somebody needs to come in saying, okay, like, I feel like if somebody could run on a healthcare platform and mostly healthcare platform, and if they were coming in saying that they would clean out the system, like, it would be like, they would have to be doing some other pretty bad stuff for me not to be 100% behind them at this point, because that just needs to be fixed so badly. And I mean, so socialism, it's not something I want for healthcare, at least not on the country level, because I don't trust that the US government will be able to do a good job of that, given some of the stuff it's already doing.
Yeah. So just to sort of circle back, I think, like you said, there's a lot of different definitions, and I totally agree with that. Like the classical, 20th century definition, socialism is like a means to an end of communism. And communism is the stateless, classless society where everyone's just about equal and we're able to produce all the things that people need fairly easily. Yeah. So that's what socialism is trying to achieve. And so in order to do that, some entity, whether it be the state or the people, control the means of production. And so that's really what it is. It's the democratic ownership of the means of production. Yeah, in the classical sense. I'm not really for that personally. I think that the means of production should be like
work. I also think that that was written back, towards the end, like in the what do you call it? I don't know what you call it, but we've moved past that. We're in the information age now, rather
like the industrial sort of age.
Yeah. So, so in the industrial age, it was an attempted system. In the industrial age, I still think it failed when it was tried, to the extent that it was tried. And now I think we're kind of left with figuring out what in the information age is going to actually help people, because now you're in a situation where you've got some countries that are still maybe dealing with the problems of the industrial age, but I would say our country, we're dealing with the problems of the information age, and that's, it's a different set of problems, and I don't think anybody's really proposed any good solutions for those problems, really. I think we're just kind of struggling by with the same systems as before. I don't think socialism is the best one. I think that capitalism is kind of like a base, but I think you're going to need structures that on top of capitalism that kind of that lead to the right information being exposed at the right time, so people can see when a corporation is being greedy or dishonest. I think that if people know that, they can avoid, like, I think in order for capitalism to work effectively, you need people who are doing the wrong thing to be exposed at the right time. And I think the internet gives us the infrastructure to do that, but we haven't figured out how to use the internet effectively, I guess. And I'm worried about that.
Yeah. And so I would definitely agree with you, like going the 20th century socialism route, probably not going to work. Like it didn't work then. I do think that though now socialism is more about having certain things that are like run more by the government or by the people. So having healthcare that's run not for profit to help people. I think that's been very effective. Like if you think about it, so like everyone gets school, so that's socialized basically, right?
Yeah.
We have a military that's socialized. That's fine. Our military is just fine.
Yeah.
So like what we need is like some kind
I'm
of
not fine with the way the public education system is working, though. I mean, I think it leaves a lot to be desired.
Yeah, but it's better than not having one, for sure.
Yeah,
it's better than not having one.
Like I feel like you should have. I feel like everybody should have the opportunity to be educated. So if the public education system is the best we can do, then I guess it's better than nothing at all. I just worry that a lot of people are being sledgehammered through a system when almost any other option short of locking them up in a basement for 12 years would produce something better, a better outcome in their life. Like that's how I feel like a lot of people are when it comes to, like the educational aspect of still. Obviously, there's the aspect of being people and learning how to socialize with people in your age group, and that can be very good. But in terms of like actually learning information, like I just feel like, especially, I think the issue we're having, it goes back to us being in the information age. Now that there's internet, I feel like all our old institutions are kind of scrambling to figure out what to do about that because we've got
sort of. I don't think, unfortunately, I don't know if the internet really changes education as much as we'd hope it would, because the way that people have seen, so like, you would think, oh, well, we could just have all our classes on the internet. Well, it turns out that doesn't really work. It's actually really, really, really bad.
And so the question is,
you need to go into a classroom and have human interaction. Yeah.
Yeah, but I don't think the human interaction in the classrooms is optimal, and that's the issue. Because I feel like what would be ideal is to have more students have more time to have more access to quality one-on-one instructors and have the classroom not be taking away from that as much. So, but I'm not really sure how to parse that and how you would go about creating a system, even if you could create a new system that would handle that the best. I just know that I don't think our current system is the best one possible. And that's, I guess.
I mean, so some of the places that have like the best public education, some of them, they totally ban, like in, I think it's like Norway, one of the Scandinavian countries, they totally ban private education. And it's all the money goes into public education. So, it really depends on like the way to fix it may, we kind of have to, we have to hold it accountable. People have to actually care.
Yeah.
Want to make
I think part of it is, you've got to ask yourself, well, could the educational market potentially encourage the public schools to do better? Like if the people who can afford private education choose private education, will that ultimately lead to the public schools learning to do better so that they can compete for funding, like for government funding, and they can do that if they produce better public schools. It's really hard to know, though, when you're comparing public and privately funded organizations, what's going to work in the long term, like what is going to actually lead to a higher quality of services. And that's why I feel like I'm really not qualified to talk about this, because I don't even know, because you're dealing with completely different systems of funding.
And a lot of the data I've seen, it shows that it's kind of hard to really just pump money into education and get a real good outcome. Yeah. A lot of it has to do with inequality. So if we solved inequality on a certain level, I think that would actually help more.
Yeah, but solving inequality, like inequality is one of the basic problems of life. And so the question is, how do you deal with that? And I
Well,
wish.
some countries deal with it a lot better than we do, and they have better outcomes because of it.
Yeah, well, but then the question is how much of that has to do with them being a smaller country? Because the thing that I worry about is that if education is socialized on a federal level, and most of the socialism for education happens on a federal level, that might be part of the reason why we're having so many issues. I think that, I think that states, if a state comes up with a program, that program is more likely to at least be coherent. Now maybe you don't like what they're teaching in the schools, but it's at least more likely to be coherent than something done by a federal government for a country as big as ours. And see, that's what I'm concerned about, is that our country is so large that it really is harder for us, I think, than your standard European country to make a socialized program work, be it healthcare or be it education, because we're so big and we have such a diverse group of communities, not even people, just people on the next level, but communities too. And I think it does create issues when one government in Washington, D.C. is trying to decide what should happen everywhere in a country with 50 states. And that
Sure.
it's hard.
Yeah, I don't know if like there would. I don't think because there's never been any there's federal mandates for education, but there's never been like a federal program for education. It's always just been a state issue. But yeah, if like a state had a more like, like a different model where everything was public, who knows how those outcomes
Yeah,
would be.
yeah, and I think what will have to happen, hopefully people will pay attention to what the different states are doing. I think what it really comes down to is, are we willing to focus on a local level or not? Like I was saying before, in terms of getting involved in local government, I think if millennials really want to make changes, then we've got to start focusing on what's happening to us on a local level here in the States, because the United States is so large that the only millennials who are really going to have a huge amount of influence are the ones who become exceptionally famous. Most of us aren't going to become exceptionally famous. So we've got to ask ourselves, well, what can we do? And maybe a local level is the best for now.
Yeah.
Just focus on, and part of that is comparing your local area to what other local areas are doing. But I haven't been doing that. I've just been kind of going along, living my merry life. But I think that I need to change my ways. That's what I'm gathering from this.
Yeah. So, you were saying that you would be kind of skeptical of a like sort of nationalized healthcare system or something sort of more like the European system. I'm curious why you would feel that way, because like like Europe and Canada, they actually spend less.
About scalability. You're talking about scalability. None of the European countries that have done well on with socialized medicine and with socialized systems, they have less land area, so it's easier to organize efforts. They have less.
But all of the European countries, though, they all have like some type of universal healthcare. So like that's United Kingdom, Germany, France.
But they
like
have,
those are big countries with a lot of people. They have a lot of people,
but not as many people as the United States. I don't know the exact ratio.
If
Also, I think
all of the European countries,
how well they're doing.
Like if you look at all of them, though, like that's more people, and they all have universal healthcare. Every single country.
Well, yes, but their universal healthcare is managed by their smaller country units for the most part, isn't it?
Well, I mean, Germany. I don't know how many people Germany has, but like that's a very large
by the EU, because that's the real question here. Because what I'm talking about is, I don't think socialism to like socialized healthcare. I'm not sure that socialized healthcare will scale very well. So it might work better, say, in Canada than it would in the US, because Canada has less population than California even. Like, say California creates its socialized healthcare system. That may work better than socialized healthcare for the US in general, because you're talking about less people, less infrastructure problems where things could go wrong. I'm just concerned about the US as a whole doing it, because I'm concerned about the level. I feel like there are less things that can go wrong the smaller population you have when it comes to socialized any service. And so I feel like it would be, socialized medicine would be less likely to create situations that people didn't like to create situations where people actually couldn't get coverage for the things that they needed because their conditions weren't understood, or because there was new medicine that came out that wasn't being fully accepted by whatever needed to accept it. Like if there were like 20 different organizations that need to approve something, obviously that's, an arbitrary number, but I'm worried about, I think that there are less bureaucratic problems in a smaller country that goes for a socialized healthcare method. And so I think that when we look to Europe and try to pick out a model from Europe, I think it's better for a state to do that than it would be for a country to do that, because we've got to talk about how the population difference would affect us. And that's the main thing I think that concerns me, is that our country is more populous than any single one of those European countries. And I don't want us to think that everything would go exactly the same when maybe it would be better for states to handle it.
Sure. So one idea that a lot of people have is that we would take our current Medicare system and allow everyone to enter into it. And so Medicare, if you compare Medicare to like private, it costs less, it spends less, and it gets really good outcomes. So that seems like the next step for us to go, to have some kind of a universal system.
It seems like, at least in the short term, I would say based on what you said, it would be better than what's going on now. The question is what would happen in the long term, though, and I'm not sure. And so I can see why, I don't really have a strong opinion on that, because I can see how badly things are going right now in terms of people trying to get private health care. I just worry that that when the government is providing the insurance, and when the government is providing the healthcare coverage, then you have the government deciding which diseases are important or not. And not that the insurance companies don't do that anyway, but I think
exactly, they do it now.
Good to have. I feel like it's good to have multiple options, and I feel like maybe if things were managed at a state level, it would provide people with more. I just worry that. I worry about the federal government doing everything. That's something that I worry about, because it means that the federal government makes more and more moral decisions in people's everyday lives. And that might not seem like a problem now, but what if the government changes its mind in a direction that you don't like? And as somebody, that's one of the issues that I have.
Yeah, I totally agree that there's gonna be, like there would be a fight over, is the government gonna, fund abortions, and like it would basically be a political football.
Well, yeah, and the question is, well, what do you, and the thing about abortion, we haven't talked about this, but I don't think that abortion is ever not going to cause people to argue and fight, because there are two really important principles that people are arguing for in the case of abortion. One is that, life is always valuable, and human life in particular. And the other is that people should have the right to make their own choices. And both of those principles are true principles. And so depending on how you see the situation, you're going to people are going to fight very passionately for the side that they see the situation is coming down on. And, my own position would take a long time to get into, so I'm not, but there's a reason people have these arguments.
But yeah, I think this is a fair point, because there's going to be these political disagreements, and it's going to cause things to shift depending on who's in power.
Yeah, and that's kind of disturbing too, because you're talking about a situation where the federal government, it flips between Republicans and Democrats pretty regularly. And that's a problem when it comes to trying to get to hope that the federal government will manage anything effectively, because I feel like, it doesn't matter who starts the program, Republicans or Democrats, the other party will come in and try to mess it up. And that's what's worrisome to me about the federal government trying to do anything, if you think about it, because I feel like the parties are at each other's throats right now. I mean, that really is how it's going on right now.
They kind of always are. Yeah, I agree with you.
I think the polarization's making it worse, and I'm just really worried.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you there, that is something that's going to be baked into our, whatever the American style of that system would be. That would be a problem that would have a lot of flaws, but I still think that if you look at the way that Medicare is as a program in comparison to other forms of healthcare, especially private ones, it's just a better program. It would be run better. And even if there's like sabotage or political infighting, it's
Yeah,
better
well,
to
I
have
don't know
that than
enough
have
about
nothing.
how bad all of the other insurance programs are, but yeah, I am kind of concerned about the way that that the private insurance companies and the private healthcare programs run themselves. And I think, unfortunately, what I really think needs to happen is that I really think that someone needs to go through and set up a very set of strict laws saying, don't, that make it harder for people to overcharge people, because right now the healthcare systems are overcharging people right and left and getting away with it. And I think that that should stop. And I think that the way it would stop is if there were some laws in place that made it less easy for people to do that. And
Yeah.
do I know? And I think that that's the first thing that should be done. And I think, even if we were going to go to socialized medicine, I think that that should be done, because you don't want the government paying too much money to these people either. So, I think we should just kind of figure out how to stop people from overcharging people right and left, which I don't know how to do that, I guess, but I guess it starts with being aware.
Mhm.
So, yeah.
So let me just ask you a couple of other sort of, like, I guess my major thesis was, in 21st century, socialism is basically these type of universal programs that the government runs that are beneficial to everyone. So
Mhm.
that's what I would say it is now, more so than creating
Yeah,
communism.
or at least you hope they're beneficial to everyone since they're being run by the government.
Yes, yeah, exactly. That's the intent.
Yeah.
Is that the outcome? Well, who knows?
Yeah, well,
So
you hope it works out, but the fact that it might not is why people have arguments about this in the first place.
yeah, that's a fair point.
Yeah.
So how would you feel about like the government having a federal program where people can go to like a public university for free, like universally?
Oh, that's hard. Part of it, like, I kind of feel like the university system is breaking down, to be honest. So part of me would rather just like to see how the education and job market pans out before the government tries to step
Mhm.
in and do something for the
Yeah.
current system. So that like, it's not that I'm opposed to the government funding education if it really is necessary education for getting a job. What I'm opposed to is the government funding education, assuming that it's necessary education when it may actually not be. I guess that's what I'm opposed to.
Mhm.
So if
Yeah,
it is
I
necessary
understand.
education,
Mhm.
I'm not opposed to the government funding it. If it's not, then I am, and I really think you kind of have to see what happens and what pans out in the next little while to make that judgment.
Yeah. I generally kind of agree with you, but I kind of don't. I think that the problem right now is, in comparison to our parents, the demand for education is like astronomically higher. And so American universities, so like if you look at your average median American university, the demand there is way higher than it was 40 years ago. And that plus some other stuff to do with like the way that we fund uh college, so like the federal loans, that has caused like astronomical inflation in that market. But
Yeah.
a lot of it has to do with the fact that there are people from other countries. So like the people who go to Cal, most of them are from other countries, and their parents pay, like, they write a check for them to go to Cal, and they pay a ton of money. So you have people, people from America are competing with them to go to these universities. So so money's going in, and they're still sort of outputting the same thing. So inflation is going to be generated. So I think the problem is we have to figure out some way to rein in the cost of education, because the demand for education now is a lot higher than it was before.
Yeah, and
And I think the universal program could actually help that.
yeah, well, I think the question is, where are we going in terms of universities? Because I feel like the university system was designed again for a time before internet. So the question is, as adults, and I feel like the university system may actually be more malleable to change than the system that people, than the public education system for children, because you're talking about something that has been in use by people that can basically take care of themselves. And so the question is, I know there are more and more online universities, and so I'm just wondering I don't know what the future of the university system is. And I think that there might be a cheaper way to do it that is eventually recognized and is eventually seen as the mainstream way, and universities become more elite. And if that's the case, I don't think that the government would need to fund them. So the question, but the government might want to fund the less elite method. So
Sure.
I'm interested in seeing what happens.
My only issue with that is like there's still a clear demand and a clear value for a lot of like higher education. Like it's still giving you an outcome that is positive, still giving you a positive return on your investment. The only question is like if the cost was the same as it was like 4 years ago, I mean it would be a no-brainer. It's just that the cost has gone up so much. So like
Yeah,
if
but the question is the cost about to drop as people choose new methods and less elite methods? That's the issue that I have. Like, are people about to find a new method for themselves to be able to deal with? Because if they are, well, then we don't need the government to save a sinking ship here. But if they're not, then yes, I would agree with you. You see what I'm saying?
I kind of see. So you're saying that a lot of people might leave going to like major universities, and then that's going to cause a price correction.
Yeah. Yeah, or not even a price correction for the universities. The universities might still charge what they charge, but that people who don't want to go to who don't want to go to school in the same way, who would rather just do community college or get, if online certifications become more reliable, and there becomes, that's what I'm kind of thinking might happen. And so I kind of want to see what happens in the future. And I'm not sure that the government should step in and save what might be a sinking ship. But if it's not a sinking ship, then, well, yes, I would say it makes sense for the government to fund it. If it's if that's become part of the basic education people need, then yes, I'm just not sure that that's the only way to do it.
Yeah,
So.
I think that's a fair point. I think a lot of, again, like a lot of the price inflation has been the way we funded schools and the fact that the demand is still there. And so like the people going to like the major universities in America, it's from across the planet. It's the same with like our real estate in like the hotbed. So in San Francisco, like the people buying houses, these are people who they have tons of money from like all over the world, Russia, China, all these rich billionaires. They're like they buy stuff sight unseen. And it's the same with when they send their kids to colleges. It's like, oh, you got into Cal? Here's a check for $400,000 for $400,000. Go, and that's it. And they send them there with with a with a BMW and a check for $400,000, and they just go. So like in this system, it's hard for your average middle class Joe Schmo American to do the same thing without incurring tons of debt, right?
Yeah.
So if we got rid of the debt, if we got rid of the price, like it's still college, even like if you're majoring in gender studies, it's still a no-brainer. It's still very good. The cost is part of the problem. But you're right. I do think that there's going to be a lot of people like I got part of my education was at a private non-accredited university. So I think that like a lot of that is going to become more popular. I think that my only problem is like it's weird. So like I think a lot of them right now, they're really bad. They're really, really bad. But they do serve a purpose and they actually have good outcomes. So it's like, why can't we have something that's good that has good outcomes too?
Yeah. And I guess that's the real question here. And then you kind of wonder, well, why aren't people setting that up? Because I feel like it should be fairly easy for someone, who has the money to invest to create something like that. So I guess we should just kind of maybe hold our breath and see, or we should, I mean, I don't know.
Yeah.
But I'm just personally going to see what happens. I've gone through school myself. I have a degree that I need to pay off the debt for, that I will if I can just get a job. We'll see what happens.
Yeah. So how would you feel about like universal paid sick and family leave? Like, do you think that would be a good idea?
you know, not well, not if it's keeping people from getting jobs. Because I have an issue where I feel like the reason it's been hard for me to find full-time employment is actually has a lot to do with the fact that government mandates particular benefits, but only for people with full-time employment at organizations. And so I actually kind of am annoyed with the government for mandating the things it has mandated when I just wanted a freaking job. And that's kind of where I am right now. So, yeah.
So yeah, so you feel like it can go too far, but generally it might
Yeah,
be
I
okay
feel
on
like
some
the
level.
government is kind of trying to artificially put me into a higher class than when I just want to be able to get, money that I needed to. And so, basically, like I feel like the government is saying, "Oh, no, 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 you're too good for that. You're too good to work at this job that you would have worked at. You're too good for that. We won't let anybody take care of you unless they can pay for blah blah." And it's like, no, I just want to work, and that's kind of where I am.
Well, so
So
you think the employers are not employing you because of the mandates on them?
yeah, yeah, I think that employers offer less full-time jobs because of the mandates on them, and it really bothers me because it means that all the jobs that are available are most of the jobs that are available are part-time, and that really stinks. Part-time jobs are awful if you
Mm.
want to actually make money because you want to have a full-time job, and that really bothers me. And so I'm not happy with the the mandates. I feel like they cause more problems for people. I feel like minimum wage, same thing. I feel like minimum wage is like, oh, you're too good. You're too good to work for the money that you want to work for. We'll make you like, I mean, I know that it's not always that way, but that's my perception as somebody who has been underemployed for months now, for more than a year now, I guess,
Okay.
if you count my other things. So yeah, that's my perception.
Okay. All right. So my last question on these like kind of socialism topics. So how would you feel about sort of tying into what you were talking about? Like if there was a job guarantee by the federal government and a living wage. So you would always be paid some amounts like 15 or $20 an hour for every job you got, no matter what it was. So basically minimum wage like you were talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And also like there would be a federal job guarantee for certain people, where you would be able to get a job at the federal government doing something sort of like the Depression era. I forget what they called it, but people would do stuff and the government would employ them and it kept them out of being chronically unemployed. So yeah, what do you think of that?
I guess I have a hard time trusting that it would actually be real and pan out. I um I have a hard time. I Yeah, I have a hard time trusting that it wouldn't cause other problems. But it would be like if it were there, I'd accept it. Like, I guess I'll say I'd accept it if it were there. But yeah, I
Okay.
don't know that I'd trust it to last or to be a good thing in the long term. But yeah, I'd accept it.
Okay. All right, great. I think that answers all the questions. I think that was pretty good discussion. Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you have any closing thoughts or feelings about how things went?
Oh, well, I think it was good to kind of talk and to kind of clarify topics. I'm glad you asked me back for this conversation. I think you and I are really not as different in our beliefs about some things as it may have appeared from listening to the first conversation. I think for some things we are definitely, but for some things we're not, and it was really good to get into the things that we weren't. And so I'm glad we had this conversation and kind of got a more holistic view of where we stand in relation to each other in terms of opinions. So I mean, I'm
Yeah,
really glad we did this.
yeah. I feel like this has been like some of the best discussions I've had on my channel. I feel like they've been pretty fruitful, and I feel like we're able to meet each other in a place where even though we disagree, we're able to have sort of a conversation that's good and meaningful and actually go somewhere. So I've really enjoyed talking with you.
Yeah, and I'm glad I got to talk with you. So thank you so much for inviting me back. This was very good.
Yeah, cool. Okay, so yeah, I'll just wrap it up there, and yeah, everyone should go subscribe to her channel. She's awesome. She talks about really interesting stuff
Yeah.
and super friendly. And everyone should write comments too, and check out
Yeah.
her Patreon.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Because like I guess I'll have to talk about it for her because she does. It's hard to self shill
Yeah,
as it were.
yeah. I feel like I'm like the beggar woman standing out on the street, like please.
Please give me money, please.
Yeah, but yeah.
All right, cool. Take care, everyone. I think I'm gonna try and have another conversation with someone who called into a radio show I listened to, and he kind of had a James Damore moment. He kind of did not express himself very well, and it led to him appearing very kind of racist. But he's I'm gonna let him sort of talk about his opinions and you know hear him out actually. So that should be interesting. All right, take care, everyone. Have a good night.